and look to your left. And that is really, truly a gift of love. We're all be gifted with joyous people in our lives and people that we invite to our lives. And how we treat them and how we conduct ourselves in life are the gifts that we're giving, in return. So even a show like this, or a new home, or a new baby, or a new relationship, or new love, or a new lover, or a new car, or whatever it is that we have, a new bicycle, are all sort of examples of how we conduct ourselves in our lives. That's what I believe. Anyway, I want to invite you to the show, Macho Man. The name of the show came from just some inspiration of a lot of different areas, and it mostly evolved from years of wanting to see men kind of grow into really who they are. Men feeling comfortable with crying, with decorating their own apartments, with buying flowers for themselves. Finally, because 20 years ago, men buying flowers for themselves and being sort of like metrosexual was a little like, ooh, a little weird, And if I can read this quote, I think it kind of helps a little bit to sort of talk about what I wanted to say about this show anyway. The traditional macho man has been taught to suppress and deny his inner female self, who becomes desperate to be recognized and loved. I love the sound of the baby. No, it's okay. It's okay. I love the sound of the baby. As he begins to recognize them as reflections of his own female, which we have inside of ourselves, our goddess, right? Our goddess selves, right? He can begin to love and honor the powerful, nurturing human woman inside of him. I didn't say that, but I love that quote, I'd like to thank a couple of people. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Laura Hinkle and Sin City Gallery peoples, and of course Ken Dagnall of Fiero Communications and Mark Fiero, of course, for supporting me on this. I really appreciate that. In 1982, as you know, Calvin Klein unveiled his iconic brief
Here, hit the space bar.
billboards, right?
Carlo, hit the space bar. There you go.
Advertising, underwear advertising forever. Prior to that, in the 70s, you had all the seedy, X-rated, posters of women with like those X's censoring things in Times Square, and it wasn't a big deal, right? Right? It wasn't a big deal. It went on like from the 50s all through the 70s, right? Well, in 1982, when he unveiled his Michael in white briefs in Times Square, all of a sudden it became a political issue, and they veiled it for like several months while negotiations went through to like decide whether they wanted to take the veil off and let it like ride. Let's see if society was ready for something like that. That's 1982. That's not too far from today, in my opinion. Okay, I don't know how old you guys are, but that is not too far away.
I was born in 1982.
I've had the pleasure of working with some really great photographers. Some of them photographed some of these incredible images. I've worked with Nesky very early in my career, and then Herb Ritz, of course, when I was still going to the school, Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, which is the Yale of art schools, is what it's considered. Bruce Weber, of course, and there'll be some images from Abaddon here, which I think are really, really incredible. You go from the 80s, right, into, of course, in 1992, of course, Marky Mark was photographed for Calvin Klein in underwear too, which was not a big turning point, but it was kind of like, oh, okay, Marky Mark gets a billboard,
Feel it.
And then in the late 80s, then you have Versace, and you have Marcus Schenkenberg, who's like the first male supermodel, and that was like male supermodel. Even in my generation, it was like, what is that? We didn't really understand what that was, And you start looking at beauty and the identification of how people look at beauty. Our perceptions of beauty are, digested how? By what's shoved in our brains, And our brains are capable of only handling so much. If our environment only provides us with, tolerance for it, right? have the capacity to really are capable of. You know, what are our brains so magnificent and we limit it by saying, oh no, we can't do that, and you know, we have limitations. And so I didn't expect to really do much of a talk, but I wanted to, you know, kind of start with that. One of the things that I wanted to do was to approach this a little bit more organically, and I didn't do that right off the bat. I kind of went a little ethereal, which is kind of okay. I feel that I think a lot of us should be connected more with our thoughts, you know, like how we look at art and how art kind of like translates itself through us in our lives, you know. And it's not about this show, and it's not about, you know, it's about how we interpret life and how we look at people and how different they are from ourselves, you know. We're all the same. We're all spiritual creatures of this planet, and we're all sexual creatures of this planet. And so once we get that out of the way, then maybe our perceptions or our interpretations of how we view other people will be less hostile, less judgmentary. You know, all of a sudden we look at, you know, things like this, and I wasn't expecting to look at that screen at that moment. But you know, hello, there's some fabulousness going on. And I lost my train of thought, you know? What was that?
You were on some sentence that was really long, hard to understand. You kept going on.
Wow, okay. I really did lose my complete thoughts.
Richard Avedon, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause.
Well, you guys all remember that beautiful shot that Avedon shot in front of, with a woman in front of the two elephants, and she's leaning backwards, right, with that black evening gown with the white stripe, right, and she's like this, and the animals start to move, and the elephants start to move. Well, even at that time, you know, to photograph a woman, to photograph this beautiful female model with these animals was sort of like, oh, was that barbaric? Was that a little out there? Of course it was. It was way out there. Women weren't photographed in that manner. They were photographed looking like, oh, Jesus is so beautiful, you know, like, and it's great. I mean, I love Jesus too, but, you know, like, you know, it was always like, so they were so like, oh, like, so cutesy and so, you know, coquette and so flirty. And I think that Avedon started moving a lot of things around, and Urban Pen, and then Scribnesky, who I've worked with, and of course her Brits in the 80s, who like did all this incredible male iconic, like, you know, gorgeous stuff with men and women, just way out of bounds, you know. Scribnesky with all of Iman, with all the naked men for like North Beach Leather, and she was like laying on top of them naked. It was this really beautiful imagery, you know. Finally, we get to the men in the 80s and the 90s and the now. You know, you've got people like, you know, what, Dolce & Gabbana, you got Gucci, you got everyone using men in so many ways, because now men, even David Beckham, look at David Beckham, you see him like totally being sort of like, almost like for a lot of the young men, you know, being like sort of like, oh, wow, I want to kind of be like him. You know? And 30 years ago, if you had seen David Beckham in like sheer underwear showing like his, like the imprint of his penis and, you know, almost his butt crack, like completely wide open, you'd be like, oh, that's pornographic, you know? But in the 70s, when Times Square had the X-rated billboards up with the women, it wasn't a big deal, was it? All of a sudden you bring men into the equation and it just becomes sort of like chaotic. And now there's no limitations for what's happening in advertising. Even this show is not really shocking, but it's something fresh, maybe a way of looking at men in a different way. That maybe I look at men that way. Maybe I see them in that way. So maybe it's just personal, or maybe is it the way we all look at people, the way we all interpret them? I have no idea. I can't say that. I have no idea.